Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of My Endurance Live. If you're new to the group, my name is Eric, and I want to welcome you. So every Tuesday, we go live in the group and share on a topic of interest. And one of the ways I like to share is inviting guests into the group. So tonight we have Mike McKnight. If you don't know who Mike is a husband, a father of two, a professional ultra runner. He's also a ultra running coach. He's known as the Low Carb Runner and also the king of the 200s. Mike has multiple Triple Crown wins in that distance, has a course record on four 200-mile distance races, and the fastest known time on the Colorado Trail, where he went over 500 miles in just over 7 days, which is documented on YouTube in a video called From Broken to Breaking. So if you guys haven't watched that, make sure you check it out. Um, so with that being said, if you're not following Mike, give him a follow on Instagram at the Low Carb Runner, um, or just search him up on YouTube. You'll find all kinds of stuff on that. And then if you're looking in like working with Mike as a coach, where can they find you, Mike?
The lowcarb-runner.com and then just Instagram.
Okay, perfect. So tonight, Mike is going to take us on a journey that has not only changed his running and his results, but it's changed his life in a switch that many runners are skeptical of. And it's going low carb. So, um, but lots of runners are starting to embrace this also. So excited to hear Mike's journey on that. But you want to take it away? One thing I want to make clear though is because I think a lot of people get this wrong when they hear that you're a low carb runner. You're a low carb runner, not a no carb runner. So I think that's important, like leading into the training call tonight. So with that being said, take it away, Mike.
Thank you. And then yes, it's low carb. It's not no carb. It's not keto. It's not carnivore. It's just strategic, all of it. And I do want to preference this by saying that I've never claimed, nor will I ever claim that this approach is for everybody. I highly believe that everybody's bodies are different and we all thrive differently. But I'm also never going to claim that this approach isn't for anybody, like a lot of people out there say. There's a lot of people that think that low carb just should be avoided by all athletes, and I think that that is not right. So what I'll do here is I'll share my story, and maybe some of you who are listening to this might be in similar situations right now, and potentially a low carb approach might work for you. But again, I'm not saying it's going to work for everybody. I do think that there are small benefits that people might find from adapting a similar approach. I'm not going to say those benefits will come athletically, but health wise, I do think there's some value to this approach. So, I have been ultra running for just over a decade now. I started my first ultra was in 2013, and I've done over 50 ultras since then. A few FKT attempts, some successful, like the Colorado Trail, some unsuccessful. I've been going after the Arizona Trail. It's an 800-mile trail that spans the entire state of Arizona. I've failed twice at it now, but I'm planning on going back next spring and addressing some of the issues that I've ran into. But so the intro that Eric just gave, thank you, Eric. That was a great intro.
Yeah, definitely.
um, but so like the FKT that I have, the 200-mile wins that I have, all of that didn't come right away when I started ultra running. It took some time. And those wins, those records came after switching to a low carb approach. And so the first, gosh, I mean, I started low carb in 2017. So the first, what would that be, 4 years of my ultra running career or experience, whatever you want to call it, I had a lot of issues, um, mostly lack of energy and or digestive issues. I found myself in this weird, like every race, one of two things usually always happened. I would either lose a ton of energy and crash and walk it into the finish, or I would just puke all the time. And I mean, I'm a bigger guy. I'm a little bit leaner now, but when I first started running, I'm 6'1", and at the time I was just about 195 pounds. So not your typical runner build. And so I would find myself in this like back and forth where I would eat, the amount of calories that my body needed for the energy to finish the races that I was doing, but my stomach just couldn't handle it, and so I just puke it all up, and so that would lead to energy issues. And then I would go into certain races and be like, well, this sucks. I don't want to puke, so I'm just not going to eat as much for this race. And while I didn't have stomach issues, I would just not have any energy because I wasn't given my specific body the amount of calories and carbohydrates that it needed to get to the finish. So it was just this vicious cycle. It was never fun. It was very rare for me to have a race where that didn't happen. Um, Fortunately for me, though, before focusing on running and coaching, I actually had a job at Ultra Footwear. I was in the marketing department. I was the sports marketing director. And so part of my role was I built the elite athlete team at Ultra. And part of one of the members of that team was Jeff Browning. And is it a surprise what's that he's
No, they,
coming?
they, they know he's coming next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm sure he'll talk a lot about it next week too. His approach to nutrition, it's very identical to what I'm doing. But anyway, so Jeff Browning, he was one of our athletes, and we held a athlete retreat in Zion, Utah. This was April of 2017. I remember it because that was when my first son, was born. So we were driving to Zion. I had a big van. I was picking up all the athletes. Jeff Browning happened to be in the front seat with me. And this was the first time I met the guy. We talked a lot through email. And I still remember I had the white label Monster energy drink that I was sipping on that drive. And Jeff was just super cool. He was asking about my running. I was telling him that I just had issues, told him what the issues were, and I was like, "You're a professional runner. What kind of advice do you have for me?" And then he looked at me and looked at the can of Monster and said, "The first thing I'd recommend is you ditch that crap." And that caught me off guard because at the time, I'm sure, well, maybe I don't know if anyone in the groups, I would guess that you've heard of Carl Meltzer, the speed goat.
Mhm.
He's a legend. He's local. He's here in Utah. And so when I first started running, I kind of idolized him because like he was this famous runner that had a shoe named after him, that had like a hydration pack or belt named after him.
Mhm.
And so I just started reading a bunch of magazines where he would be interviewed. And every now and then he'd be asked about nutrition, and he would just say, I eat whatever I want. I have a beer if I want it. I have pizza if I want it. I have ice cream if I want it. And so when I read that, I was like, that sounds like an awesome approach. I'll do that. Um, and so when Jeff told me to ditch the Monster, that really caught me off guard. So I was like, why? I thought we just needed a bunch of calories. Like, everybody says calories is king. And so why would I want to ditch this Monster? And that's when he told me about his low carb, OFM strategic keto approach. And this was a 5 hour drive from the airport to Zion, Utah. So if any of you've heard Jeff Browning speak on a podcast, you know that he can spew out all the information. And so I had 5 hours worth of information on that drive from this professional runner about why I might want to look into a low carb approach. And the two things that he said that really stood out to me was one, you're training your body to be efficient at burning fat for fuel. And what that means is, and so if any of you like listening to podcasts or doing research, there's two doctors that kind of led the path for low carb approaches for endurance athletes, and that's doctors Jeff Volek and Stephen Finney. And so, in one of the things that they talk about how every athlete, every person, even the thinnest of the thin of us, has this massive storage of fat in our bodies. And from what I remember, the numbers that they gave was about 40,000 grams of fat is what our bodies can store, give or take. And our bodies store roughly 2,000 grams of glycogen, glucose, carbohydrates.
Mhm.
Um, and so So Jeff was like, we have this massive storage of fat, and because the body burns carbohydrate easier than fat, most people, because of a high carbohydrate diet, hardly ever tap into their fat storage. And so it's almost a foreign fuel source for a lot of people, for most people, especially if you're following a high carb diet. And so Jeff was like, you keep losing energy because your body doesn't know that it has this fat. It's not tapping into this fat. It eventually does. I don't know, I'm sure a lot of you have heard people give marathon recaps where they say they felt great for the first 18 miles and then they crashed hard till about mile 22 or 23. And then they found this amazing like reserve of energy and finished strong. And
Hmm.
so what's happening is they depleted their glycogen. Their bodies never do that. And so the body's like, okay, we're starving. We don't have any fuel. Like, how are we supposed to survive? And then eventually the body's like, okay, we have this massive storage of fuel. We're going to tap into that and help, help the body survive basically. And so Jeff was like, a low carb approach is going to teach your body to be more efficient and familiar with that huge storage of fat. And so that way, when you do deplete through glycogen, it's not going to take that 5 to 8 miles or whatever it is for your body to tap into it because it's familiar with it. And so when Jeff told me that, I was like, okay, that's potentially going to solve my like the bonking that I have in my races because my body's going to be familiar with burning fat for fuel. And then the other thing that he said too is that because your body's going to be more efficient at burning fat, you can get away with eating a little bit less calories during your races. And so for me, I was like, well, that's the other issue I have. I can't handle the amount of calories that I need to like for my body to have energy because it makes me puke. So if I can back off on those calories and not puke, but still have energy to get to the finish, like this just makes total sense to me. And so, we went to this athlete retreat. Um, I don't know who was all on the call, if anyone's from Utah or has been to Zion, Utah before, but there's this really cool route. It's called the Zion Traverse. It's 50 miles and it just spans through the entire national park of Zion. It's an amazing route. Um, excuse me. But we for one of the days for the athlete summit, we plan to run that route together. And I was still like, when Jeff told me about the low carb approach, I was like, this makes sense to me. Like I should probably do this, but you know, I had a very addictive I was very addicted to sugar before this. Like, me and my wife, our groceries like every week was 3 12 packs of Mountain Dew, and that was all for me. Ice cream every night before bed. We would get Panda Express, cheap Chinese food 3 times a week. Like I was all about the carbohydrates, the breading, the sugars, the chips, like all of it. So, I didn't want to give that up, but I was intrigued. And then we went on this run, this Zion Traverse. It was 50 miles. And I want to say it was around mile 25 or 30, but I crashed hard. And it's probably, I mean, I honestly forgot about this until I don't know if anyone's heard of Ian Sharman. He's an amazing runner, like top 10 Western States for multiple years in a row. I ran into him a couple weeks ago and he reminded me of this experience. I forgot all about it, but I crashed super hard. Like they had to send not a rescue vehicle, but like somebody from Ultra HQ had to like track me down and find me in a car and give me a ride back because I crashed so unbelievably hard. Um, and so after that crash and seeing just how well Jeff did, that he got done with that 50 miles and he looked like he didn't run, like he was walking, like he could have done jumping jacks, squats, like he looked perfectly fine. And so seeing my crash and having to get rescued and then seeing just how at the time he was probably 46, 47, this 46-year-old just goes crushes 50 milers and then looks like he's just woke up from a nap when he finishes. Like to me, I was like, if I want to be serious about this, then I probably should try this approach and see if it helps me. And so I went home. Our son was born 5 or so days later. And I picked the worst time to do it, but I essentially started the approach the day our son was born.
Hmm.
for tracking purposes, it's really nice because every birthday he has, I'm like, all right, he turned 7 next month. So I'm like, this is my 7 year anniversary of being low carb.
Oh, wow.
Um,
That's neat.
yeah. But like, I don't know if this is just Utah culture, but we had a lot of neighbors, members of our church that would bring us food and stuff like
Hmm.
for the first week or 2 weeks after having him, just to help us adapt as new parents. And like all the food was like spaghetti, lasagna, sandwiches. And so like it was really hard for me to switch to it, but there was a piece of me that like really wanted to thrive as a runner. And so I stuck with it. And that was essentially what led me to it. I mean, that first year, so this was April of 2017, and that August, I did my first Triple Crown of 200s, which, excuse me, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's three 200-mile races, the Bigfoot 200 in August, the Tahoe 200 in September, and then the Moab 240 in October. And so it's three 200-mile races in the span of 60 days. This was about 4 or 5 months after I went low carb. Uh, but the thing that I noticed, like I didn't crash, I didn't lose energy. I had other issues that I dealt with that stemmed from lack of strength training and mobility, injury related stuff. But in terms of like the energy and the stomach issues, I didn't have that. And so, 640 miles of racing in 60 days, not having those issues that I'd had for the past 4 or so years really like sold me on this approach. So I stuck with it. And ever since then, things have been great. The like 4 or 5 months after the Triple Crown of 200s, I won my first race ever. It was a 50 miler. A month after that, I won a 100 miler and almost set a course record. I missed Jeff Browning's course record by about 5 minutes. But to go from somebody who was middle to back of the pack, who was just always fighting stomach issues and energy issues, to like all of a sudden within a year win the overall Triple Crown of 200s, which is the fastest combined time between the three races for everybody that did all three races. And then to win a 50-mile race and set a course record, to win a 100-mile race and almost have the course record of the guy that taught me the approach, like everything just checked off for me. And I was like, this approach is for me. And everything has just been great from a running and a health perspective ever since. So, I tell people all the time that if I was to wake up tomorrow and just all of a sudden I'm not good at running anymore, as long as I still felt healthy and still felt all the other benefits that I feel from this approach, I would stick with it just because it's so much more than just the performance side of things that I'm seeing from it, but from a health standpoint. So I don't need to try. I'm not trying to make this into like a sales pitch for all of you to try this approach, but I am just trying to share the benefits that I see. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, one question, Mike. Um, how long did it take you to start noticing results from the day you started to when you started thinking like, oh, okay, this actually works?
It took me like 4 months, like essentially up to the Triple Crown.
Okay.
Um, in retrospect, there's some things that I did wrong because I was just going off of that 5 hour conversation that Jeff gave me. I was going off of my own research. So there's a lot of things that I messed up that would have probably sped that up. Like, part of my coaching, like right now I'm coaching 55 athletes, and the majority of them, it's just like running coaching, getting them ready for races. I would say a handful of them, about 5 to 8, are looking for help with the low carb approach as well. And so, like a lot of the stuff that I coach them on, I didn't do, and I see them transition much quicker. And so, in retrospect, I don't know why I stuck with it because like it was 4 months of pure misery. Like my body was so used to so many carbs. Like I probably never tapped into my fat storage before switching to this approach. And so that like basically that bonking experience that I described, where like a marathon runner feels
Hmm.
great to mile 18 and then feels like crap for the next 6 miles. Like those 6 miles that they felt like crap, like I felt like that every day almost for 4 months.
Wow.
Uh, my runs suffered. I remember I was at the gym lifting weights and I fell asleep between sets. Like I had close to no energy and it was very, very miserable. But the people that I coach with this approach now, like implementing, like one of the things that I didn't do, like when you go low carb, you lose more electrolytes. You dump more water as a low carb athlete. So with that water dumpage, you're going to lose more salt.
Mhm.
And so I wasn't supplementing electrolytes, which is one of the reasons I didn't have any energy. And so a big focus I have my athletes implement is electrolyte supplementation, which is a huge help for not feeling like junk for 4 months. So that's probably one of the biggest things somebody could do if they want to switch to a low carb approach is make sure you're supplementing clean electrolytes. Um, but yeah, after those 4 months though, I started feeling amazing. But those 4 months were absolutely awful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and then also, how do you strategically use carbs in a day-to-day uh, context and then also in a race setting?
Yeah, so it's a very particular approach. Like there's lots of little tweaks to make. I've tweaked things a lot over the years. Um, a lot of the tweaking comes from like increased volume, lack of volume. I mean, the easiest way to remember it is the more I'm doing, the more I'm running, the more weightlifting I'm doing, the more carbs I'm going to have.
Hmm.
On recovery days, on recovery weeks, even like the first 3 to 6 days after a race, like recovery, I'm very, very low carb, borderline keto carnivore. But right now, I lift weights 4 days a week. I'm running anywhere from 60 to 90 miles with 10 to 15,000 feet of climbing. Like I have a pretty big season this year. I'm going after 5 200s.
Oh,
And
wow.
so training is I'm training a lot right now. So my
Hmm.
carbohydrates are a little bit higher. Um, when I say higher though, it's still like I'm still capping myself between 150 to 200 grams of carbohydrates in a day,
Okay.
which might sound high, but if you start counting your carbohydrates, you're going to learn that you can hit that very, very fast. Um, there's in my world, it's not common to have dietitians and nutritionists kind of use me as an example of what not to do. Um, and so I do follow these nutritionists just to see what kind of stuff they're saying about me. But I did see one nutritionist recommend that athletes get upwards of 600 grams of carbs a day, especially on like long run days.
Hmm.
And so when you factor in like recommendations like that to 150 to 200 grams of carbohydrates, that's still cutting it more than half.
Hmm.
So, for a keto approach, or so that's why it's very important for people to know it's not a keto approach, it's not a carnivore approach, it's low carb, and it's a mix of the three. Um, but yeah, so like, for example, today was my long run. I ran 25 miles. It took about 4.5 hours in the mountains. I still had carbs. Like, I try to keep my carbs personally. Like, I hate using this word because I want people to eat what they want to eat. But, for me, I try picking like clean carbs for my fueling. So I use like Spring Energy. It's a gel, but they use real food. Like, one of their gels that I had today had some gluten-free oats in it. It had maple syrup in it. It has fruit, it has rice, like it's real food in terms of
Hmm.
carbs and not just a bunch of sugar. Um, I got like siete potato chips. I don't know if anyone's heard of
Hmm.
those, but their thing is they cook their potato chips in avocado oil versus seed oils. I personally choose to avoid seed oils, so I still have a little bit of like standards and boundaries for the carbs that I choose to eat. But like on my run today, I had gels, I had chips. When I got home, I had some fruit. So, today's probably about a 200 gram carb day. Not counting what I had in my run. I don't count that towards my
Hmm.
daily like goal, you could say.
Yeah.
But like Sunday, for example, Sunday's a recovery day for me. I don't run. I do a very light strength training routine, mostly body weight with like dumbbells, because just for me, I hate taking a full day off. I got to do something. And so on that day where it's just like, 45 minutes to an hour of strength training, I'll have about 50 grams of carbohydrates, because your muscles still benefit from carbs in terms of if you're trying to grow muscle and have your muscles recover.
Mhm.
So I still will get about 50 grams of carbs right after my strength training routine on Sunday. But then for the rest of the day, I'm basically carnivore. I just eat a bunch of meat and eggs. So, that's kind of a look into things. Um, Tomorrow, for example, I'm going to wake up and go run for about an hour since it's a kind of a recovery day after my long run today. And so I'll do that run from about 6:30 or so to 7:30 in the morning. And then when I finish, I'll follow that up with some low-fat cottage cheese and some fruit. And the reason I do that is because I personally, I don't want to confuse my body. Like if I have a bunch of fat and a bunch of carbs in one meal, then the body's going to store the fat as fat and it's going to burn the carbs.
Mhm.
And so when I have a bunch of carbs, like a bunch of fruit, I'm going to have low fat. So that way it's just burning the carbs and I'm not having any fat that's going to get stored. So, I'll have low fat cottage cheese, a bunch of fruit. Then I go to the gym, lift weights for about an hour and a half. During that hour and a half, I do have an intra carbohydrate type mix. It's about 50 grams of carbohydrates that I drink while I'm lifting weights. And then after I'm done with lifting weights, I have chicken with either some rice or red potatoes. Again, lean protein with my carbohydrates. And then for the rest of the day, I go back to carnivore. And so usually every day I'm having my carbohydrates between 10:30 and 2:30. We'll say that just for easy like math sake. So I'm getting my carbohydrates in a 4 hour window. So it's almost like intermittent fasting, but with carbohydrates.
Mhm.
I have my carbs between 10:30 and 2:30 in a 4 hour window. I go about the rest of my day eating a bunch of fat, eating a bunch of animal byproducts. And by the time I get back to that time frame the next day, I've almost gone, yeah, I've gone 24 hours, or no, that'd be 20 hours. I've gone 20 hours without carbohydrates. So by that point, when you factor in that I run in the morning, usually in a fasted state for my shorter runs, when you factor in the carb fast all day, all night, going for a run, I'm back into fat burning mode, and then I go back into having carbs. So, the goal with this approach, again, that's why it's like so complex and can be
Mhm.
confusing, but the goal with this approach is to be efficient at both sources. I don't want to just eat fat and not any carbs so that when I have carbs on race day, my body's going to freak out because it's not familiar with it. Like I want to have both every day. So that way, come race day, when I take in my carbohydrates, my body doesn't have any issues going right back into fat burning mode. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know if that made
Um,
sense.
so you mentioned earlier that because your body is getting or is really good at burning fat for fuel, you don't need to consume as many calories during a race. So how do you regiment your gel intake or whatever you're eating? Is it like a lot of runners like every 45 minutes I'm gonna pack a gel or every, do you stick to that or do you just like an as need?
Yeah, so I still try to eat every 45 minutes to an hour, just not as much.
Mhm.
So like before this approach, I was trying to get about 400 calories an hour. Like, I mean, when you think about it, everybody's different, but you're burning 650 to 850 calories an hour.
Mhm.
And so, the longer the race, unless you're eating 800 calories an hour, you're building up, you're digging this hole. Like, 10 hours in that
Yeah.
threshold of how much you're burning to how much you're eating, you're widening that quite a bit. And so, I'm still trying to eat calories every hour. And again, I was trying to do 400 calories an hour at the time just because of my build. I'm still a bigger person. I'm still 6'1", 175 pounds. So, somebody like Jeff Browning, I'm sure he's 5'7" and 140 pounds.
Mhm.
So, I need calories every hour. So, but instead of the 400, I usually shoot for about half of that.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
usually trying to get about 200 calories an hour right now.
Yeah, it seems a lot more manageable.
Yeah,
So,
less stomach issues for sure.
yeah. Because I suffer from that too. It seems like mile 40, I'm gonna get sick. And it's like, it's just so it's like this is like super helpful for me in a personal way. So um
Well,
ha,
the
ha,
other thing, oh, sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, really quickly, I mean, ultra running is such a, I mean, you think it's easy. You just throw on your shoes and go for a run. But like, I don't want to mislead people and say that like the only reason you're getting stomach issues is because of your body struggling to digest the food that you're trying to eat. I mean, something like being off on your electrolytes is also going to mess up your stomach. So, I haven't had perfect races since switching low carb. I still have had races where I've had stomach issues,
Mhm,
but that's an electrolyte imbalance. Like, if you're drinking too much water and not having enough electrolytes, that can mess up your digestion. On the flip side, if you're having way too many electrolytes, like one mistake I've seen a lot of runners make is they just drink Tailwind for the
mhm,
whole race and they're not drinking water. Tailwind, last I checked, has around 600 grams of sodium in a serving. And so, I mean, the standard, if you're serious about this, look into getting a sweat test where you can learn how much sodium per liter of sweat you individually lose.
mhm,
But the average is 600 to 850 or 900 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat. That's the average that people are losing.
mhm.
And so, these people that are just sucking tailwind the whole race and not drinking enough water, they're pumping their body with that 600 milligrams of sodium at least an hour, but your body needs water to help it absorb, or else it's just going to end up sitting in your gut. And
Yeah.
that's what can also mess up your stomach. So I just had to throw that out there because I don't want everybody who's listening to think like, well, I have stomach issues at races, so I should do this to fix my stomach issues. Like that could help, but it could also just be something as simple as not having your electrolytes dialed in.
Mhm. Yeah, tons of variables.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I got a question from Zach. Is it do you recover faster after your races? And how do you recover after your races?
Yeah, so going back to the Triple Crown experience in 2017, this is one reason I also struggled adapting is I didn't understand that one of the greatest benefits of this approach is the recovery aspect. And so when I did the Triple Crown in 2017, I almost used food, and I know this is an unhealthy relationship with food, but I essentially used food as a motivating factor to finish those 200s. So whenever I like had a low spot, I was like, okay, if I finish this race, I'm gonna give myself 5 days to eat whatever I want. And so I still have pictures on my phone, like after my first 200, me and my wife drove to 4 or 5 different fast food places so I could like pick items off of each menu that I loved. We went to A&W so I could get those deep fried cheese curds. We went to KFC so I can get a bucket of fried chicken. We went to Arby's so I could get their curly fries. Like terrible, terrible food. And other pictures that I have are of my legs and my ankles and just how much they swelled up.
Mm,
Like those are highly inflammatory foods. And after putting your body through the ringer for, I mean, my first 200 took me 70 hours or so. So, pounding my body for 70 hours and then introducing these highly inflammatory foods, like I could barely walk, let alone run between those
mm,
3 races. And I would show up to the next race with issues. When I showed up to the second 200, I had IT band issues. When I showed up to the last one, I developed a stress fracture. And so like the food I was eating really slowed down my recovery. And then I finally in 2018 I hired Jeff Browning to be my coach. And when I told him about that, he was just like, bro, like if you want to do that, do it 2 weeks after the race. Like that's the cool thing about Jeff. He's just like, if you want to do that, do that. I'm not going to tell you not to do
mm,
that, but don't do it within the first week of your race because that's eating this way is going to help you recover faster. And so in 2019, I went after the Triple Crown of 200s again. and I was much more strict. I took that approach that Jeff gave me, where I was like, if I want to do this, I'm going to wait a few weeks later. Um, and that year, so I went to those three 200s. I was just like, I just want to improve my time. I had a lot of issues. I want to try to get sub 60 hours for all three of those races. Like that was my main goal. And I ended up winning all three of those races that year. Again, that was not the intent. That was not the plan. It just happened. But the biggest thing that I noticed is like I was essentially carnivore after each of those races for a
Hmm.
full week, like no swelling whatsoever, no joint pain. I was fatigued like from lack of sleep, but like after 5 to 7 days after each of those races, I was out running 45 minutes to an hour and a half again. I felt totally fine.
Wow.
And so, like, by that next week, when Jeff was like, if you want to have these foods, like, wait a week, by the time that next week came, I was like, I feel so freaking amazing. I don't want to jeopardize that. So I just didn't end up doing it. So, I've avoided those foods for the most part for the past, what would that be, 5 years or so, 6 years. Um, but yeah, like the biggest benefit I've seen from this is just like recovery. Like before this approach, I would be in bed for the whole weekend watching TV. My parents, if I lived with them, or my wife when we got married, like would have to bring me food on a plate because I wasn't moving.
Hmm.
But now it's just like, I finished the Cocodona 250, which was last May. Um, I finished that thing, and I had 6 or 7 athletes running the race. I finished it in 69 hours. I think it's like 110 or 120 hour cutoff, but I got an Airbnb in Flagstaff so I could watch the athletes that I coach finish. And, even after finishing that race, like I was up walking around, I hiked up to see some of my athletes. I was pulling all-nighters because some of them
Hmm.
were finishing in the middle of the night. Like, the recovery is one of the biggest benefits to this approach from what I've seen. And I know that Jeff Browning talks a lot about that too.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. That's super cool. Um, Another question. Um, and I don't think this is related to the low carb, but do you have any warm up or cool down routines? I don't know. And I don't know if it was per race or just for a normal run, but you could give both scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, for a warm-up routine, I always try to just do like foam rolling, static stretch, especially since I run in the morning. Like static stretching, I don't like doing that before my runs just because my muscles are a little bit tighter and you have a higher chance of pulling your muscles. So I'll foam roll to break some stuff up. But the biggest thing I do is glute activating exercises, like for 2 to 4 minutes, because one of the biggest issues that I've seen that runners run into is either weak or inactive glutes.
Hmm.
Um, one way that you can tell if you have weak or inactive glutes is, just paying attention to what muscles are engaging when you're running. For example, yeah, recently I just came off of another Arizona Trail FKT attempt, and I ended up straining my quad. And I went and saw a PT, and she was the one that pointed out to me that I was like all quad, that my glutes weren't doing anything, even though I strength train, even though I do squats, even though I do movements that are supposed to engage my glutes. So I've been really focusing on before heading out the door, doing glute bridges, doing lateral band walks, wall sits, just something where I can like really focus and see if my glutes are engaging. And once I start to feel them engaging, I head out the door. And so that way they're engaged while I'm running. So yeah, foam rolling, glute engagement activities. And then after, I mean, for me, the biggest thing that I do where I just plan out my day like so close, like, I have my runs, I have my coaching calls, I have strength training, I have to pick up my kids from school. So, as soon as I'm done with that run, and either just after getting back from the gym, like I start my coaching calls, I'll hop on the couch, throw on my compression boots, like the Normatec or the Rapid Reboot. Those, uh, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know
Yeah.
what those are. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're basically these big sleeves on your legs that adds a bunch of air, like a blood pressure cuff. And so it sends blood flow to your legs and helps your legs recover. So I'll do those boots almost daily. And then just the massage gun and foam rolling and stuff like that. Pretty standard.
And the last question is, um, why don't you eat before your runs in the morning?
It's a good question. Some of it is like going back to that, like the carb intermittent fasting that I talked about. Like I want my body to dip in and out of fat burning mode every day. And so, like I only do that for my weekday runs. Like if I'm running an hour to an hour and a half, for my long runs, like, this morning I ate before my long run. So I don't do it on long run days, but for the shorter runs, I just do it to really hone in on the fat burning.
Hmm.
And then just convenience sake, like I said, I set my alarm and have 10 minutes to get ready and get out the door and go for my run. Like I don't want to wait, set it like 20 minutes earlier. So so some of it's laziness,
That's
but,
awesome.
but sometimes though, like if I'm doing a speed work, like, 2 times a week, I'll do speed work. Um, Sometimes before those, like I'll have a tablespoon of honey or
Hmm.
something before I head out the door just to get a little bit of carbs.
Okay,
But yeah, I mean, I just do it out of laziness and then to hone in fat burning.
nice, cool. Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate your time tonight.
Yeah.
So before we sign off, I have a question I ask all of our guests. Um, what does my endurance life mean to you in a personal context?
What does my endurance life mean to me in a personal context?
Mhm.
That's a good question. So for me, life's not all about just running. Um, I think that a lot of runners and athletes fall into that trap where whether it's running, whether it's biking, whether it's basketball, like that is your life essentially, and it's almost your identity. That's why going back to what I said earlier, if I wake up and I just can't run well anymore, as long as I still feel healthy and feel like I'm thriving, I'm going to keep eating this way. And so for me, like, there's so much more to life than just running. It's about adventure. It's about being with your loved ones, your family, your friends, developing other hobbies, other passions. And so, when it comes to endurance life, that's exactly what it is. It's living your life in a way that endure to the end. I don't want it to sound like life is just meant to be endured. I think that that has kind of maybe a negative ring to it. Like you're just enduring it, you're just trying to survive. But, enduring is a positive thing. And so, my endurance life, that's exactly what it is. It's about your entire life as a whole. Are you are you doing the things that you need to do to make you happier? Are you doing the things that you need to do to make your family happier? And are you just doing the things that you need to do to have a long life where you're thriving in all aspects?
Awesome. So again, thank you for your time. I'm gonna sign off of Facebook real quick.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for watching and your questions. Just say thank you, Mike.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.